the Song of Songs. The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. Whatever else this book is, this is a book of romance, of love, and even of eroticism. This is a book that is fiercely charged. I have to say, this is one of those books that, as a non-too-cooperative teenager in RE lessons, I was able to point out to the other lads in the class the naughty bits. This is a book that is actually in Jewish tradition not considered fit to be read by younger boys, just in case they are overcome with the thought of what is going on here. This is powerful stuff. 2,500 years, 3,000 years old. This is love poetry. This is romance poetry. This is poetry celebrating intimacy and sexuality at the heart of our identity. And we need to take it seriously for what it is. And I've preached on that previously, and you've heard me on the subject more than once. We need to take seriously that that is part of our identity, not part of some fallen nature, but a highlight of God's creative intention for us, created for intimacy. But this book is much more than simply what it seems. And for those who have interpreted this text down through the centuries, they've seen within this book not just a call and a command and a liberty for intimacy between people, but something that calls us to intimacy with God. Eugene Peterson, in his wonderful book, 5 Smooth Stones for Pastoral Work, quotes Richard Wilbur on this passage, saying, "My eye will never know the disease." My eye will never know the dry disease of thinking things no more than what he sees. This book is not simply what it's about. It's pointing us to something else also. Song of Songs is and was read at the celebration of Passover within Jewish communities. I had the pleasure of visiting recently in Camden, the Museum of Jewish Life. And it's a fascinating place. It's not one of those big showy museums. It's a small museum, the sort of place that no doubt school trips get taken to on a regular basis. But it was a fantastic place to spend a couple of hours, to have a guided tour around some of the exhibits. And in one room there is this fantastic exhibit. There is an ark chest. If you go to a synagogue, there will usually be a huge wardrobe-like affair in which the scrolls are kept, in which Torah is placed. And in front of it on display was one of the Torah scrolls, a huge scroll, beautifully illustrated, beautifully constructed. But in one of the little glass cabinets, you also saw some little scrolls. And the book Song of Songs is one of the little scrolls of the Old Testament. 5 little scrolls, the Megillot, the 5 scrolls of Lamentations, Ruth, Esther, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. And I'd always assumed they were referred to as the little scrolls because they were, well, short. But in that glass cabinet are some beautiful little scrolls. The words of Song of Songs beautifully placed on little ivory scrolls designed to be read at family Shabbat, designed to be read as the family gathered at Passover. Just as in the synagogue, this book would be read. Why? Because at Passover, as the community remembers God's saving rescue plan for the people, they also remember that at the heart of God's rescue plan for the people is God's call on individual lives to intimacy with God, to being together with God. One of the great medieval mystic writers, Bernard of Clairvaux, preached many times from Song of Songs. In fact, he preached 86 sermons and barely got beyond chapter 2. He found in this book a call in his life where he had voluntarily given up human intimacy. He found in this book a call to intimacy with God. At the heart of our readings of Song of Songs is the realization that intimacy with God is central to our faith. It is what Jesus came to restore. It's what the church is intended to foster. Intimacy with God. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away with me. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away with me. The church in all its forms needs to challenge and change the injustice of poverty. It needs to call out and to champion creation care, which is needed to challenge climate crisis. It needs to reject in all its forms prejudice and exclusion. The church is to challenge the sins of prejudice around issues of ethnicity, sexuality, gender, disability. The church has many callings upon it, and you have heard me preach on many of them. But at the beginning and at the end and throughout, what the church is actually about is God. God saying to God's people, arise, my love, my fair one, and come away with me. Come away for an hour on a Sunday morning to listen for my voice, to seek my presence. Come away as you sit in the garden and sense my presence all around you. Come away as you walk through the streets of the city and in the presence of the mighty buildings see an old church dwarfed by the glass and steel structures around it. Be reminded of God's presence in the midst and come away with me. At the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, in the middle of the day, listen for God's call. Listen for God's voice. As we sit with friends, as we drink coffee, isn't it wonderful we can do that again, carefully, sensibly. As we spend time telling stories, as we remind ourselves of how much we need human company. In those moments, sense God's presence too, and come away with me. The book of Song of Songs has within it so much longing, so much desire. And if you are fortunate, you will have experienced at some point in your life that sense of overwhelming desire. And the writer of Song of Songs, I believe, wants you to know, and the inspirer of Song of Songs wants you to see, that our human desire one for the other is as nothing compared to the call and the desire of God on our lives. My beloved speaks and says to me, "Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away with me." We might respond to a sermon like this by spending more time in reading the Bible, in praying as individuals. We might respond by taking opportunities to gather together to seek God. We might respond by taking opportunity to go away, to take time to retreat and seek God. For God is waiting for us, calling us, not simply to salvation. God sorted that out for us 2,000 years ago. But for a walk, an intimate walk, a day-by-day relationship with God. Many years ago, I was a very young and very minor part of an organization called the Evangelical Alliance. I was an intern in their field team. And one of the things that meant I got to do was that I got to attend the council meetings of the Evangelical Alliance. These were gatherings of church leaders from a variety of traditions and places. There were Anglican bishops, there were heads of the Baptist Union, there were Salvation Army majors, there were all sorts of people. There were the people I used to go to Spring Harvest to listen to. There were the great and the good of the evangelical world gathered together to discuss important and earnest things. But my favorite memory of those times with people, many of whom I was quite literally in awe of, my favorite memory of those times was a morning when our worship was going to be led by a worship leader who lived not very far away, a bloke called Noel Richards. I'd come across him at Spring Harvest. He came in not with a big band, but just with his guitar. And as he led these people, in those days, sadly, the Evangelical Alliance was mostly a gathering of men, as he led these men of authority and influence, he said, "I want to share with you a song that I wrote last night. It's quite a simple song. And the song was called 'To Be in Your Presence.' And it's going to be our next song in a few moments. We're going to stay seated as previous. I couldn't find this song in the usual format, but I did find that on Noel Richards' website at the beginning of lockdown, he'd knocked out a few tunes, just him and his guitar. And there is something of the intimacy of that reminds me of that day in the presence of such greatness, when one man and his guitar reminded me that the greatness was not in the room. The greatness was the one whom we were seeking to serve. So in response to the sermon this morning, we're going to take a moment of quiet, and then Kevin's going to press play on To Be in Your Presence. Amen.